All right, what is up, everybody? So, I just wanted to talk about the Dante situation. So, as a lot of people maybe have heard, Rebecca did mention recently on the Dev Shorts that they are going to be adjusting Dante. Now, I really want to thank this person on Reddit, Wilito, this individual. So they did a really nice job of going into missions with kind of like realistic builds, not like overly jacked up on strength builds, and kind of showing the relative amounts of overguard that you can generate with each frame. So as you can see, like yes, Dante is the highest at 69,000. Nice. Um, but Styanax and Frost are not really all that far behind. In addition to that, um, Dante's Overguard ability. So if we go into Warframe here, so Dante's Overguard ability, which I believe is both light verse. So this increases health, which frankly, like, I mean, if you're overguard tanking or you're shield tanking, the health increase doesn't matter at all. Um, and then the other thing is final verse triumph will also generate overguard. Now it doesn't really generate, the initial cast generates a bunch. So a couple things here. So the important thing I'm trying to point out with both of these, so whether you're doing light verse or light verse into final verse, that literally the only thing you're doing there is generating overguard. You are not doing anything else with your time. So you can only cast one ability at a time, right? Like you can only do the animation for one thing at a time. So you are spending, several seconds with the sole purpose of generating overguard. Now, I don't really understand how that's any different. I mean, frankly, just on paper, that's a lot worse than the other overguard frames. Because if we go back to, this post, we can see that, okay, so what is generating overguard on Frost? Well, it's his 4 augment. But what else is his 4 doing? His 4 is also freezing enemies in a large area, doing AoE damage, and with a pretty, reasonable amount of strength. Like basically every Frost build is going to be full armor stripping with his 4. That is a lot more than just applying Overguard, right? Same thing with Styanax. What is Styanax doing when he's applying Overguard? With the right build, leveraging things like Arcane Arachne, you are doing ridiculous amounts of damage with Styanax. His 4 does absolutely insane damage. So it's very easy to clear Steel Path with Styanax's 4, and you're generating Overguard at the same time. Whereas with Dante, the only thing you're doing when you're generating Overguard is generating Overguard. There's no additional effects on those abilities. Now, the argument that I think DE is going with here, and this is very often their justification for making changes, is that um, Dante is disruptive to other players. Now, that, you know, I I can kind of get that, but it really seems so. I think everybody is talking about two examples, right? So one, and it's kind of almost bad timing for Dante, right? So one, Dante is a new frame. So DE typically looks, as far as like they've explained it, DE typically looks at two factors when it comes to whether they should nerf something. One is what's the play rate. Two is how disruptive to other people is that thing. So, for example, when the Kuva Brahma was just literally there were 3+ Kuva Brahmas in every single mission, and if you didn't have a Kuva Brahma, you couldn't kill anything because everything was dead, as soon as it was on your screen. That was both really high play rate and really disruptive. So they don't really nerf things because they're strong. And that's a misconception I've seen quite a bit in the discourse surrounding this, is that people are saying, oh, if you're, because another thing Dante can do well is he has like pretty decent AoE nuke capabilities, right? So, you have Equinox, which by herself isn't that good, but in a group that's abusing her MAME, you can scale her AoE nuke to basically infinite damage at absurd ranges. You have Gyre, who does crazy AoE damage. Even in Steel Path, Gyre can basically rip through any map almost instantly, way faster than Dante can. As far as like, I mean, if you're, so I've seen people saying he can like one-shot waves on Hydron. Have you ever been in Hydron with an explosive Legerdemain Mirage? You don't even see the enemies spawn. They literally instantly die as soon as they load in because of the mines, Or Saren, Octavia, like, I mean, there's frames that are significantly stronger than Dante in a lot of respects, both in terms of Overguard, because in my opinion, Frost and Styanax, while they can't apply Overguard as fast, they're doing other useful things while they're applying Overguard. And in terms of AoE nuke capabilities, there's other frames that do that way better too. Now you could make some argument that should Dante be able to do both of those frames, and he has a very good exalted weapon, should he be able to have all of that at the same time? In my opinion, I really don't see what the problem is. The problem comes in with the disruptive part. So we've already identified that they don't really balance around power. And I think Dante is a very strong frame, but I don't think he's the best frame in the game. In my opinion, that's Saren. I think Saren is the queen of Warframe. Um, so then you look at play rate, which he's a brand new frame. So of course his play rate is going to be extremely high. He's also just fun to play. So even if he wasn't like that insanely strong, I think people would still be playing him because he's just really fun. The other thing is the disruption to other players argument. So for, a frame like Anaros, who just got a rework, Anaros really loves running Hunter Adrenaline. And then the other frame, obviously, is Chroma, which, coincidentally enough, Chroma just got a new augment, which makes his health take damage. And apparently this doesn't work with Overguard. So neither of those two things, those damage to health mechanics, like Hunter Adrenaline, Rage, or Vex Armor, those don't work. Those don't play well with Overguard. Now, I'm of the opinion where if you applying a beneficial effect to an ally hurts their build, then the issue is with their build, not with the beneficial effect. Like a buff should always be a buff. I guess you could make a similar argument for like, if you're running Harrow and giving people crit and they're using melee duplicate and they don't want more crit, like, but that is like such a insanely niche situation. And in that case, like, I mean, if you're going to run a build that's that sensitive, I mean, you pretty much have to do it solo, in my opinion. So I, you know, and let me just say, I am like the biggest DE stan. I'm very positive on DE basically all the time in pretty much all my videos. I very rarely criticize DE. The one thing I do have some issue with is how they balance frames. And, you know, kind of like BandAid fixes. When the real issue a lot of the times is the core ability or frame design. So I think this is actually a perfect example where the issue in this case is Vex Armor. Vex Armor is a very poorly designed ability that does not work well in the current iteration of Warframe. Um, you know, health tanking as a concept is extremely rare in Warframe at this point. The vast majority of frames either tank through shields or through Overguard. And that's what DE designed, Like the players didn't make that happen, DE did. So if they're going to blame anyone, I don't think there's really any blame. That's just how the game is right now. The way that enemies scale, even into like reasonable levels of steel path, you just like randomly get one shot if you're playing a health tanking build, even if it has very high mitigation. So, I think players feel very forced into shielding or overguard, and Vex armor just doesn't work with either of those paradigms. On top of that, the other issue I have with DE is BandAid fixing situations or frame abilities specifically with augments. And that's literally what they just tried to do with Vex Armor. Rather than address Vex Armor's core issues, they tried to fix those issues with an augment. And I think there are some places where augments are good, but when augments are used to just band-aid fix core design problems, I don't think that's good. So like a perfect example of an augment to me is explosive legerdemain, which I just mentioned. It lets you take Mirage, who is known for being a weapons specialist frame, and basically turn her into an ability-based frame. And with how her Eclipse works, you can make a build on Mirage that can swap between the damage buff and damage mitigation. You can, use your weapons if you want to, or you can use your abilities. Like she can be so flexible. And I think augments letting that happen is really cool. When you have augments like Frost needs, I don't really play Frost very often, but if we look at Frost, he has two augments that basically define Frost right now. Like Frost is these two augments. Like Frost was considered one of the worst frames in the game until these two augments came out, right? And they did buff his 4 as well a little bit. They increased the base armor reduction, so it was easier to hit that cap, without adding too much strength. So I think it's a good reminder to put that on there. So, you know, I just don't. I think Warframe has had a ton of W's. I think that the game is in an absolutely amazing state right now. The vast majority of frames, considering how many frames are in the game, the fact that they're only 3 or 4 frames get talked about as needing adjustments still. I think that's a real testament to how well DE has done in keeping older frames relevant. Unfortunately, the way they have done that in a lot of cases is through augments. So I think, I would rather they take this situation with Dante as a sign to, take a pass at some of the older mechanics. Like they did something similar with Nidus's larva. If Nidus didn't hit enemies with his 1 while larva was active, he was basically dead in the water. He didn't get any mutation stacks. Then they added a change where if anything dies in larva, you have a chance to get mutation stacks, whether or not you were the one that killed them. I think that is really, really awesome because that lets Nidus play in groups much better. So I think that's fantastic. Now, the problem is some mechanics have not been updated, like Vex Armor. I think that's probably the best example. Now, does Chroma as a whole kind of just need a straight up rework? Yes. Maybe that's coming down the pipeline at some point. I think it would just be a real shame to knee jerk nerf Dante and make him, much less enjoyable, just because of poor design of some ability. Now, as a final point, a lot of times people will say, well, if it's really fun, it's probably just broken. Okay, well, what do you call Saren or Octavia? There are so many frames that are just turbo ultra busted in Warframe. Gauss is a complete monster. Gauss can nuke level cap enemies, and that's considered his worst ability, is the one that literally nukes everything, right? So like Gauss is disgusting. Like there's so many frames that are completely insane. So obviously it's okay if the game has really strong stuff. And there's other frames that, need to rely on weapons a little more or whatever. Like that's why they're different frames. There's a wide variety of abilities and playstyles. Um, I think people are, in my opinion, I think people are drastically overestimating Dante's power level. Um, I think that people are forgetting, and I'm hoping that the devs don't forget this, that Overguard does not have any mitigation. Zero. There's no mitigation on Overguard. You can't use adaptation on it. It doesn't get affected by armor. It doesn't have a flat mitigation attached to it like shields do. Nothing. So as you get into higher level content, you rapidly run into a situation with Dante specifically where all you're doing is applying Overguard to not die. Whereas Frost and Styanax, their abilities that apply Overguard are part of what they're doing anyways to kill enemies. But Dante it's not like that. So I'm just worried they're going to nerf the Overguard numbers to the point where that threshold comes much faster. And I think people, that would be very unfun. Like I don't really do endurance runs, right? So like, I don't really have a stake in that. If they hate endurance runs, whatever. But, there is some threshold at which, enemy level is doing too much damage. Enemy level is high enough that you're taking so much damage that all you can do is spam your overguard abilities. Right now maybe that is like level 500 enemies or something. But if they nerf the overguard numbers and that gets brought down to like, oh, well, you hit that threshold at like level 200 steel path enemies. I mean, look at some of like the activities you can do now, like Void Cascade Steel Path. That's like level 200, you know? So, I just hope that they are very careful with these Dante nerfs, and I hope that they take this as a sign to look at some of the older mechanics in the game. Um, so that's just my, 2 cents. I went on way too long about this. So thanks for bearing with me. I don't really know why I have this Frost build up still. Frost is pretty good frame though. So yeah, we'll see how exactly they nerf Dante. I really hope that it's not too heavy-handed. I do trust Rebecca. She's, pretty reasonable when it comes to stuff like this. Like for heavy ammo, right? Like I still enjoy using like the Tenet Envoy. I definitely don't feel like they butchered AoE weapons, but they're definitely not as dominant as they used to be. So we'll see how it goes. And I obviously my opinion is my own and has no weight with DE, but you never know. So thanks for watching, and hopefully Dante isn't too bad. Thanks, everybody.